So I was tasked with the edition of two councils which happened in Armenia in the 13th century, and they are transmitted within the history of Kirakos Ganjakecİ. Therefore, I had to deal with the text and more specifically with the edition, with the critical edition by Meliko Hanjanyan of 1961 of this text. The work by Meliko Hanjanyan is a milestone, is a very precious work. But I noticed that for publishing the decrees of the councils, which are contained in the history, I could not rely entirely on that, because Meliko Hanjanyan adopted some criteria which are different from those adopted in the most recent edition of Armenian text of the Corpus Christianorum series, which is where the decrees are going to be published. More specifically, Meliko Hanjanyan was able to trace 47 manuscripts and used 30 of them, which is a very good sample, and of which 27 are collated. Meliko Hanjanyan was also able to establish a few relationships between the manuscript, but he does not apply these groupings within his critical apparatus, which is something I am not allowed to do within the Corpus Christianorum. So I tried to see if it was possible to do something more. Here you see the groupings that Meliko Hanjanyan established. As you can see, there are groups of manuscripts which he supposes have a common ancestor, and some manuscripts which are outright descripti, so to say, here and here. And then this group that we will see later on. A few manuscripts, quite a few actually, are not present in this table, but for good reasons, except for the last ones that you see, which Meliko Hanjanyan himself says that he could not collate, but he would gratefully have collated them if given the chance. So I also wanted to see if there was a way to find which was the relationship of these four manuscripts that you see here with the rest. What I could observe from the consultation of manuscripts and of Meliko Hanjanyan's edition itself, it seems that we can find a common trait which is probably quite important. That is the chapters 41-43, which interest me a lot because they contain the decrees of the Council of Sis in 1243, are moved before the beginning of the history itself. So these chapters are moved in the manuscripts before the beginning of the history. And this is something that includes all these manuscripts that you see here in red. This is a good reason for supposing a common ancestor for them, at least in my opinion. Moreover, I could notice that there are some common lacunae in the beginning of the work that are found in these manuscripts that you can see, so in this group and in B, which you see here. Although Meliko Hanjanyan did not note these lacunae in the critical apparatus, by observing the manuscript in the Matanadaran, for which I thank the staff and who allowed me to do so, you can see that the lacunae were there actually, but were filled by a notably later hand. So at the original stage B, had this lacunae as well. There are also a few other common traits, this common omission, for instance, these are just examples, and the strange form Hoyarenatsi for Horenatsi, the famous Moses Horenatsi, which also groups these manuscripts together. On these grounds, it is probably possible to hypothesize that we have a common branch B. There are also two extra features, a common colophon grouping the blue manuscripts you see here. So they also had a common ancestor probably. So they are a subgroup, as you can see. And other common errors, conjunctive errors that group C and D. This is why I hypothesized a second group here. I still have to collate extensively W574. I will take care of that as soon as I can, so it can be placed within the schema. There is a second group, and I'm going to the second and last part of the presentation here. There is a second group which is very important for Meliko-Hanjanian, which is the group of this manuscript W124 from the library of the Mechitarist Library of Vienna. Basically, Meliko-Hanjanian hypothesized that all these manuscripts you see here are copies of this single manuscript, which he could not collate, unfortunately. This is based on the fact that they share a colophon by Grigor Ganjakecːi. Actually, there are two small colophons, one which names just a Grigor at the beginning, and one at the end which identifies Grigor Ganjakecːi. Also, this manuscript that you see here, J819, has a colophon by Grigor Ganjakecːi. It is different, but nonetheless, it is interesting that the scribe is the same. So there might be a connection. Moreover, there are conjunctive errors between these manuscripts, which you see here in red, which constitute a subgroup then, and which also include V. However, V and W are partial manuscripts. They stop at a certain point of the text, of the history, quite early, actually. When I examined the manuscripts and the catalogs, however, I noticed that W124 has a large lacuna in chapters 26-27 of the history, which is not present in these manuscripts and is present only here in W124 and in U. We cannot know if the lacuna was also in W and V, because these texts, these manuscripts, interrupt before chapters 26-27. But for sure, the lacuna is not present here. So these manuscripts in red, in dark red, cannot be just copies of W124. There are two possible solutions to this situation. One is that we have exactly the more or less the situation described by Meliko-Hanjanian, but just with a contamination here, an unknown manuscript from which the common ancestor of this group here filled the lacuna which was present in its original. So this is one hypothesis. The other is that we have one unknown ancestor of all these manuscripts which did not have the lacuna. The lacuna occurred here and then transmitted only to U, which is a direct copy of W124. The former hypothesis, nonetheless, is probably more economical, because this would still account for the fact that all the manuscripts have that colophon I mentioned by Grigor Ganjakec漿i. Otherwise, we have to think that one Grigor wrote this manuscript and left a short colophon, which we can see in all these manuscripts, and another Grigor Ganjakecŷi wrote a longer colophon, calling himself Grigor Ganjakecŷi, only in W124, and then transmitted to you, to manuscript U. This is a bit more complicated, probably not necessary. There is finally a trace of a possible branch, common branch of the tradition that links this group of W124 with these other manuscripts, G, E, and O. We can find, in fact, a few small but probably significant common features, which are an omission here in the text of the history. You have the passages in your handout, of course. There is also a typo in the handout, but I will not discuss it here to save time. And so you have a common omission here and here, and also a common addition in this part, which only can be found in the group of W124 and in these manuscripts. So the proposed diagram that I tried to build, also because diagrams are used in the edition of Armenian text in the Corpus Christianorum, and also they are used for building the critical apparatus below the text. The possible and proposed diagram for the history of Kirakos Ganjakecŷi is this. As you can see, this is still a work in progress, but at least we can identify some major branches which might be useful in producing a more readable and practical critical apparatus for the decrees of the councils of Cis, which I have to publish. This cannot take the place of Meliko Hanjanian's edition in any case, because it would not be as comprehensive, but it would be probably more useful for the reader to identify branches in the tradition, for at least for this re-edition of a small part of the text, instead of having just the list of all the variant readings in alphabetical order, as in Meliko Hanjanian's edition. And I conclude, and I thank you very much for your attention.